We're getting information 24/7. And from a brand perspective, or from a messaging standpoint, it's as if each of us is standing in the middle of Times Square, competing with thousands of daily messages that are vying for our customers' attention. We live in a time where the average adult attention span is 8 seconds. And to put that in perspective, the average goldfish attention span is 9 seconds.
Talking about branding strategies, how are they different from startups to established businesses?
You want to build brand awareness because brand awareness builds brand loyalty, which means that people tell everyone about you. And once you have enough brand loyalty, that builds brand equity, which is the value of your brand.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Lyoshin podcast. Today's guest is Orly Zeewy. She's a brand and marketing expert and a speaker and author and entrepreneur. Orly works with leaders and startup founders to establish messaging that quickly connects them with their customers. And today I invited Orly to talk about branding and messaging and lead marketing and things like that. So welcome, Orly. Nice to have you here.
Thank you for having me, Vita. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
So I just wanted to start with something I noticed in your profile that you're saying something like you make fuzzy clear. And I just wanted to ask if you could clarify a little bit what that means, and maybe it will help see your background in that as well.
Sure. So, the way I answer that question is by first setting the stage for the need to be clear. So we live in a world, right, in a digital world that never sleeps. We're getting information 24/7. And from a brand perspective, or from a messaging standpoint, it's as if each of us is standing in the middle of Times Square, competing with thousands of daily messages that are vying for our customers' attention. So the question really becomes, how do you cut through the noise? And, and that's whether you're a startup trying to scale fast or a company launching a new product. It all comes down to the same thing. How quickly do your customers understand what you do and why it matters to them? So getting your fuzzy clear is moving away also from the what and the how, which is what most people talk about, and moving into the why, which is why your customers work with you. What do they get from working with you? What's the transformation that your brand helps make possible?
I see. Okay. So yeah, that makes sense. You basically setting up yourself as a on that stage where you have to talk and hear many different messages. That helps clarify. All right. So let's talk about branding and messaging first. And what are some of the first steps a leader or startup owner or somebody can take in order to start clarifying or building their message?
So, it always starts with the same thing. Who am I? Because if you don't know who you are and who you are as a brand, it's really hard to convince someone to buy, right? You need to understand what this thing is. And I don't mean we're an accounting firm. I mean, we help, small business get their books in order so that they avoid any kind of legal implications down the road or something like that. I mean, you have to it's also picking your lane of where are you in your industry, specifically, what do you offer that is different from what your competitors offer. And so that's really important is to get clear on who you are. That's the first step.
Okay. And then also you mentioned in something about having the superpowers as a personal brand, maybe, or as a company brand.
Mm-hmm.
What does it really mean, and how to find and identify those superpowers in yourself or in your business?
Right. So I also talk about your zone of genius, which is kind of the, another way of thinking about it. But when you think about your superpower, there's something that you do better than everybody else. And everyone has their own superpower. And, for me, it's getting to the heart of something very quickly and being able to take a lot of information and pull out of that the one sentence that's going to get your client to sit up and go, I need this. So each person has a different superpower. And the main thing I want to really emphasize this to you and to your listeners, which is that you cannot be everything to everybody. And one of the mistakes that people make is they worry that they're going to leave people out. And so they try, and this is why messaging doesn't work for them, because they try to kind of connect with everyone. And first of all, that's impossible. Second of all, from a marketing standpoint, it's not sustainable, because you don't have the kind of deep pockets to be able to address each and every type of person. And yes, maybe everyone could use your services, but the reality is you also want to think about who is that ideal customer? Who's the one that, gets what we do, values what we do, will pay premium for what we do. So it's a two-way street. It's not just who do they want to work with, but who do you want to work with? And that's why identifying that person is critical.
So how about then if you have a company that's trying to market different people, I guess, or different markets? Do they have to set up different or have different superpowers and different messages for them, or just have their message that kind of matches with everybody? Go by that.
So first of all, your superpower is your superpower. I mean, it's like your core value. There's only one. I'm always so surprised when people start talking about, a whole list of core values. Well, then they're not core. The definition of a core value is that you would do it even if it was illegal to do it. It's like, this is who you are. This is in your DNA, and it becomes part of the DNA of your company and your company culture. So the idea is that you want to get, that's the piece that most people skip over. And it's actually really important, because it also helps you identify who's a good fit from an employee standpoint and a team standpoint. And when you realize that, the number 3 reason that startups fail is because they have the wrong team, you understand why it's so critical to get that, to get that right.
So, talking about branding strategies, how are they different from startups to established businesses?
So, an established business is a known quantity. So, you don't have to build brand awareness. People know you exist. What you have to do is remind them of what you do and bring your customers into it in terms of storytelling, because storytelling is a great way to connect with and engage with your customers. A startup is an unknown. No one's ever heard of you. And so if you try to do traditional marketing for a startup, that never works. And also it's prohibitive in terms of a budget. And more importantly, it doesn't work because the goal of branding a startup is you first have to build brand awareness. So people actually have to know you exist, right? Because you don't know you're out there, right? It's like advertising, and I use this as an example also in my book. Advertising doesn't work for startups because advertising is something you do when you're an established company, just because if you didn't do it, people would think you're out of business. But a startup, what you really want is engagement. You want people to start to notice you. You want to build brand awareness, because brand awareness builds brand loyalty, which means that people tell everyone about you. And once you have enough brand loyalty, that builds brand equity, which is the value of your brand.
So would you say that it makes sense to go for a smaller bunch of people or bunch of companies, depending on your business first, to get that engagement?
So in terms of engagement, so this is where social media comes in. I think social media is especially powerful as a marketing tool for startups, because there's billions of people on social media. And I think last time I checked, there's about 2 billion people on YouTube, and people are downloading, I forget how many millions of videos every minute. So that's one avenue you could start. You could build a library of videos. But I think that the key here is really engagement. People and the goal is to build like and trust, because we like to work with people we like and trust. So if people don't know who you are, it's really hard to convince them to buy something. So at the very beginning, you want to find early adopters. Tech companies and apps are very good at this, right? They get early adopters to use an app, to use their new technology, and then they work out the bugs, and then they fix them, and then it can go out to the general public. But by doing that, they're basically connecting with the people who are going to buy their products and tell everyone about it.
I see. Yeah. And then the strategies for personal brand versus company's brand, are there any differences there or similarities?
Yeah, so a brand is really about a company or business or a startup or a small company that's looking to scale. What they're really doing is they want to establish very clearly what they do, why they do it, who it matters to, and what they get. And as I mentioned, kind of the transformation that happens as a result. For a personal brand, it's really by getting your name out there. It's, your name is the brand. So, celebrities do this, influencers do this, where they've built a brand, and, you've really arrived when people only need to hear one name. They hear your first name and they know who you are. That's when and at that point you have millions of followers. So again, social media, I think for personal brands is especially important, but it works for businesses too. But you have there's a different purpose, right? For a personal brand, it's about building your name recognition and for people to start to see you as a thought leader, as an expert in your field. Whereas for a business, it's really more about understanding the industry they're in, the kind of the space that they're in, the topics that are really kind of important and key to that business.
Yeah. And then back to messaging for personal brand, is there any specifics or any strategies that different from businesses?
Well, again, for a business, you want to scale as quickly as possible. And so it's about, you really are focused more on getting more customers. I think for a personal brand, it's more about getting followers and engagements. And, when you post something on social media, when you have 100,000 people following you or a couple million people, that means that your personal brand has been elevated to a level where people, not only know who you are, but they want to be associated with it.
I see. Okay. And then what are some of the common mistakes that people make in branding and messaging?
So common mistakes, I would say the biggest one is trying to be everything to everyone. The saying is that if you try to speak to everyone, you engage with no one. And that's especially true when it comes to establishing your brand. Saying that you're all these different things is meaningless. And remember, we live in a time where the average adult attention span is 8 seconds. And to put that in perspective, the average goldfish attention span is 9 seconds. So our attention span is very low. So people don't have the time to figure all the stuff out, which is why, instead of telling me a bunch of things that I'm never going to remember. Plus, the other piece is when you try to say too much, especially when you go down that rabbit hole of this is what we do, this is how we do it, we've won awards or what have you. Nobody cares about that. What they care about is they want to know in 6 seconds or less why they should keep talking to you.
Yeah, that makes sense. That idea from elevator pitch, right? For startups, if you can't explain why you exist in a few seconds, then you have to work it out.
And on LinkedIn, that's especially true because what happens on LinkedIn, I land and in this culture we read top to bottom and left to right. So when we land, we see your banner. Now, most people know at least not to use the generic blue banner that comes with their LinkedIn profile. But the mistake that I see there is the banner tells me nothing. Having a picture of this beautiful lake or trees, or unless you're a nursery and you're showing plants that are grown in your nursery, it doesn't mean anything. Or they go the other way, which is filling the banner with all kinds of information and lots of images. And one of the things I see a lot with speakers is they have their headshot, and then the banner has several pictures of them. Having a picture of them on stage is one thing, but having lots of headshots and then, information about where they're speaking or how to reach them, that's not the purpose of the banner. The banner is really there to give me that, split second, oh, they talk about something around this. So, mine right now has a picture of, an eye chart that's out of focus except behind the glasses. And the message is focus your brand, because that is what you get when you work with me. So I don't explain how I do it. I don't go down all these rabbit holes and start, mentioning all kinds of things. I just, the idea is, and again, we're curious because we're human beings. So human beings love to be challenged, and we love to, we enjoy trying to figure things out. So when you make me curious, it's what happens is I want to know more about this. So then I keep scrolling, right? And the idea is you want to keep people scrolling, because the more they scroll, the more they're engaged, the more likely they are to potentially reach out to you, connect with you, maybe schedule a discovery call with you. And so what happens is when you try to tell me everything right up front, there's no reason for me to keep looking.
Yeah. I find myself many times when I look in for some website of a company, and I can't figure out what they do. I
Right.
go to about section, I go to footer, I go to somewhere else. There is no clear message, a clear statement. We do this. If you buy our service, you will have these problems gone. And I think many companies struggle with this actually.
Yeah, and that's such a great point. So so you've literally just identified the purpose of your homepage. The only thing your homepage should be doing is answering two questions. Why am I here, and why should I care? That's it. That's not the place to tell me about your latest hire, or talk about your wonderful team, or the awards you just got, or how great you are as a company, or it should be, and this is why it's hard, because it's not about you. I keep coming back to that, because people think, okay, it's my LinkedIn profile. Yes, and it's still not about you, because ultimately it's about, do I make it crystal clear why people work with me, and more importantly, what they get? A homepage should make it crystal clear that you get my problem and you have a solution for it. Now, there's lots of ways to show that. And I don't necessarily want to go into solution mode, but the key is they say you have to ask the right question, or the answer doesn't matter. And so when you're constantly thinking about, oh, I just want to talk to everybody and tell them everything, that's not the question you should be asking. The question is, who is that client and what's keeping them up at night?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. It goes for personal branding with LinkedIn or social media, or people sometimes don't even have pictures on LinkedIn, which is really strange. But maybe it's because in US resumes you don't have to have a picture. I don't know.
Well, testimonials are a really good, they're a good thing to have. So I have them throughout my website, because I find it's so much better to read what other people say about you than for you to say what you think about yourself.
Yeah, that's true. So you also have a book called Ready Launch Brand, the Lean Marketing Guide for Startups. So what motivated you to write this book? What is it about?
So I'm the daughter of an entrepreneur, and on my father's side, he comes from a long line of entrepreneurs. And as a child, I had a front row seat to my father's struggles in building a business. And I think, that kind of the germ of this idea started in childhood. And at some point during my career, I realized that I have an affinity for working with startups. And it's really a passion of mine to see them succeed, because for me, it's both personal and professional. Because when I help a founder succeed, I'm helping their family.
Yeah, that's great. So the book titled Lean Marketing, how is it different from normal marketing?
Well, so the title of the book is Ready Launch Brand. The subtitle is The Lean Marketing Guide
Well,
for Startups.
I'm sorry, yes.
No, it's okay. I just want to clarify for the audience. So yes, most people don't know the difference between traditional marketing or just marketing. They kind of, marketing is a big umbrella. But traditional marketing is typically, like advertising is a perfect example. So advertising does not work for startups. It goes back to what I was saying earlier. If nobody knows you exist, reminding them of you doesn't help them, because they haven't heard of you in the first place. So they don't really trust that. And the other part of that is it's really expensive, because advertising, you need a minimum of 100K a year just to do advertising, because it takes on average 7 times for somebody to see something, to see a message before they realize there's a message, let alone remember it or do something with it. So it's about repetition, and that's expensive. Lean marketing, on the other hand, is not about advertising or about commercials or, radio spots or, any of the other traditional venues, but it's mostly about building awareness. So to build awareness, you need a LinkedIn profile. You need to have videos. You need to start to, you need testimonials. You need to gather information that you can start to put out into the world. So content marketing is another way of thinking about this too. And the goal, again, is get as many people to know you exist, start to get people to use your product or service, always get testimonials from people who use your product or service, and start to market their experience, right? So in traditional marketing, you're marketing the product, but in lean marketing, it's really about building the reputation and the awareness of your brand, so that you build that, again, the like trust factor.
I see. Uh, is there any like a pivotal moment in startup when they should switch to traditional marketing?
Well, some people would say never. because it is really expensive, and because ultimately, we live in a world right now, like I said, we're in the digital space and everyone is on their phone. So, back in the brick and mortar days of the 20th century, when the way you learned about something, a product, was you picked up a newspaper and they ran ads, right? Nobody. Who runs ads in newspaper? Nobody, right? You don't pick up a phone book. I haven't seen a phone book in a couple decades, right? So it's a very different environment. And now what people want is, they want easy access. They want to be able to see your brand in action. That's why, being on social media is so wonderful and so helpful for these startups, because little by little, what happens is you start to bring people into your brand, and they start to kind of learn your story, but they learn it in a very organic way. And it's not salesy. We're not trying to sell anything. That's the other thing. Lean marketing is not about selling. It's about building engagement.
Yeah, and I think if you build a reputation, you don't really have to advertise it. Then people already know who this business is or who this person is, and they trust, and they become fans and followers.
Yes.
So
The goal, of course, is to build rabid fans of your brand, right? Brand ambassadors, um, yeah.
yeah, and then also about public speaking. Sometimes founders or leaders or people who build in their personal brand will have to speak in public. what are some of the like, I guess, what is advice for them to how about go about it and how to prepare themselves for this?
So, because I'm also a public speaker, I've been at this for 25 years now, and really, it's about what you know, right? Because
Mhm.
people will sense immediately when you're not being authentic. So, being authentic is really important. But my suggestion is always, first of all, figure out your lane. Where's your lane? So, I don't talk about PR. I don't talk about web design. I don't talk about logos. I talk about messaging. I talk about clarity. I talk about, connecting people to your brand and the whole idea of strategy, whether it's a web strategy or a nurturing strategy on social media or a messaging strategy. So figure out your lane, right? And then once you know that your lane, plant your flag there and do not deviate, because if remember, we live in a world where we're being messaged at roughly 12,000 messages a day. That's more than 4 million a year. And that's on the low side. Every time I look, I can never find an exact number because it changes all the time. But the reality is no one has time to figure out who you are. So you need to make it easy for them. And by what happens when you're a speaker, if you try to speak on too many topics, you don't become known for anything. So if
Mhm.
pick a lane, right? And I'll give you an example. So this was a client of mine who was a stand-up comic, and she wanted to move into public speaking for corporate events where she could bring her brand of humor to break up the day and also as a teachable moment, but to do it with humor. And so she's now known as the director of humor relations. So, right. So come up with a good title like that. And, so that's something we worked on together. But, what she realized is, she wanted to talk to, she identified her lane, in terms of women conferences, women focused conferences. And then, once she kind of figure out where, then, we work together to kind of look at what kinds of conferences and then come up with a keynote talk around the one, just as a way to kind of break the ice, right? But then as soon as she started getting all this wonderful response and wonderful engagement, then when you go to her website, you get to see that. You get to see video clips of her speaking. You see testimonials of what women walked away with after listening to her. And as a speaker, typically you fall under one of two categories. You're either inspirational or and usually those mean that, I climbed Mount Everest after, I was told I had 6 months to live, that kind of inspirational talk, versus
Mhm.
a talk that's really about, here's how you can take this and introduce it into your own life and put some of these thoughts and ideas into action. So you walk away with something that's actionable. So those are
Mhm.
kind of two, and the inspirational speaker tend to be keynote speaker. Brene Brown is an example of that. But if you're someone like my client who is is looking at humor from a different perspective, that's really unique. Not You don't see that a lot, and you don't see a lot of stand-up comic. Can you name any other stand-up comics that now? I mean, it's hard. It's not an easy switch
Mhm.
to go from doing stand-up. And she was in clubs. She was doing club acts. But what's so interesting is that together, when we clarified her brand, we spent quite a bit of time on that, because that's, as I've said right from the get-go, that's the first step. Figure out who you are. So who are you as a brand? And being the
Mhm.
director of humor director of humor resources meant that, it's really, how do I inject humor into a day that could be challenging or difficult, or, and it's a way to kind of break up the day. So then, because while you're laughing, you're also learning something.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. And then, are there any strategies for speakers to connect with their audience better?
So, well, the first thing you have to do is you've got to connect with the event planner. because they're the ones who book you. But when you do that, so you really have kind of a twofold assignment. On the one hand, you need to come up with your keynote, with your main kind of topic, which can be finessed lots of different ways, but it has a purpose, right? And so deciding, first of all, am I about being inspirational, or is it about giving you steps and things you can take with you? And then you want to break down how you're going to impact their audience. So typically when you do some, any kind of proposal for an event planner, or if you apply online, they ask you, what are 3 takeaways that the audience is going to get from your talk, right? What's the topic? What's the title? Is it going to be interactive? Are you standing there? Are you doing maybe more of a panel or workshop? So you also want to think about the format of your talk.
Okay, I understand. So I just asking something personal for my own sake, I guess. I started this podcast not long ago, a few months ago, and I've been trying different things and figuring out like you're saying, advertisement versus engagement and all of these different things. What would be your 1 or 2 feedback or recommendations to somebody who started, any sort of thing like that, a podcast, or just started being more active on LinkedIn or social media in general? What would be a couple of things that you would recommend?
So, I would definitely, especially if it's a business, it's at all business related, I would definitely put yourself on LinkedIn. I think what's interesting with podcasts is it's really about the guests. So what you want is to post, clips and of these interviews, and then add your own take on what was learned or what came out of that. And then make sure you tag not just the guest, but also people in your network who might be interested in this topic. You want to create opportunities for people to interact with your post. So, I'm currently working on my second book, and what I'm doing, which is different than what I did the first time around, is I am literally every week on LinkedIn, every Thursday, I am posting either a takeaway from one of the almost 40 interviews that I've done and things I'm learning that I'm sharing with the audience. I share also quotes from different people I've spoken to. And then the other week I post a poll, and I'm trying to get feedback from my network. And what I'm finding is that if it's the right content, which is why we go back to what's your lane, right? So again, there's only one, it's all about entrepreneurship, right? That's my lane. My lane is entrepreneurship. In this case, it's about women founders and the challenges that they have as women founders. What are some of the things that I've learned that they have shared with me? Things that are actually universal for women everywhere. And I've spoken to both women across the country and throughout the world, so it's not just in one little place. But again, pick your lane. What's your lane, right? Who are these? And I would say, a little bit about your guests to elevate their voice, because ultimately, as a podcast host, one of your goals is to elevate your guests, because having the guests be well known is only going to help you, right? Because then they're going to post. See, so after our interview, right? When I get my clip from this interview, I will post it on my website also, but I will post it on LinkedIn, and then I'll add some, of my own thoughts about some of the things that I talked about. Maybe add more information, because at the end of the day, it's really about content, and it's an 80-20 rule. So 80% of the time, you need to be giving content, free content, about all kinds of things, again, in your lane, within your zone of genius, right? Not about things you don't really know. This is only about what you know. And you want to start thinking also about who are these guests and what is kind of the theme? I think a theme is very important because every podcast has a different focus. And so understanding that from the I think understanding that is really important.
Yeah. So what my lesson learned from this conversation is basically you have to first figure out like what your superpower, which means what you're all about, right? What's your message to people gonna be, and then try to focus on very specific focused group or audience,
Right.
and just keep hitting there and kind of break through and become a little expert, if you will, or you know, become popular or whatever it's called.
Well,
Sell more if you're a business.
well, there's another
Yeah.
piece to this. And I think, when you're one of the benefits of being a new entity is you can reach out to people and say, look, I'm thinking of doing XYZ. Maybe do a poll or maybe just send out a Google Doc to, the people you've already talked to or the people you want to talk to and have them tell you what are the topics that they would be interested in. I mean, it would be an interesting exercise to do something like that.
Yeah, kind of like survey, getting feedback from people what they want in a product or in a business or
Right.
what kind of content they like. Yeah, that's a great idea too. Yeah. All right, cool. So finally, I just wanted to ask you about just in general your advice to leaders and business owners and whoever wants to promote their personal brand or thinking about that. What would you say to them?
Don't try to do everything yourself. As founders, we have a tendency to wear all the hats, but wearing all the hats in your business is exhausting and it's not sustainable. So the sooner you figure out what your superpower is and what are the things you really don't want to deal with, the sooner you can start to look for people who can help you. And the truth is, yes, nobody's ever going to do it as well as you, but believe it or not, when you train people, they actually, if you've got the right people, they can do it way better than you in a fairly short amount of time.
Yeah, that's a great advice. And I would qualify this also as one of the mistakes that people make, right?
All the
When
time.
trying to
I
grow.
see it all the time. And and honestly, if you want to be successful, you cannot hang on to that. I've seen it a lot, founders who absolutely don't want to let go of anything. And you look at them 10 years later and they haven't moved from where they were, you know? So you cannot be successful on your own. Nobody builds a successful business alone.
Yeah, that's a great recommendation and advice. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time. It's been very insightful, and I think people will like it as well. And I hope we can talk more in the future sometime. That would be great.
Sounds good. And if people want to reach out and connect with me on LinkedIn, please do. It's obviously it's Orly Zeewy. There's only one, so it should be pretty easy to find. And you can go to my website, zeewybrands.com.
Yeah, perfect. Yep, I'll add all the links to the description.
Yeah, I've got all the,
it's
I'll
easy to
give you all
find.
the links. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Cool. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
And have a good rest of the day.
Thank you. Thank you.
So later. Bye bye.